Jason Goldstein here with another edition of the Baseline Jumper podcast. And on the line with me right now, fresh off his Motorola purchase, my friend and partner, Ben McDonald. Ben, when are you going to get rid of the flip phone?
You got to beat me, Jason. I'm sorry, I can't hear you unless you give me a little beep, a little.
It's not a
walkie-talkie.
Nextel. No, it's a Motorola. Wait, no, Motorola made Nextels, right?
Yeah. See, Jason, now who's looking silly talking about old flip phones? That's right.
Well, you're the one that makes me start every show with a dad joke, so don't you dare turn this around. Anyway, another edition of the Baseline Jumper podcast coming in hot. The regular season just 3 weeks away. And we are here tonight to preview not the Southwest Division, like I incorrectly said last week, but the Northwest Division. And we're not going to waste any of your time. Ben, I really don't care how you are after that comment. So why don't you introduce our special guest?
Well, we have the one, the only, the newly married, the Portland Trailblazers expert, Pete Mertens. You're back by popular demand this year to help preview it. How are you feeling, my friend?
Ben, Jason, I am extremely excited to be here. One, to talk about the Blazers, but two, to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of you two meeting each other for the first time in person, which you'll recall I was part of that show last year for the same exact conversation that we're having tonight.
Yeah,
oh my
it's
goodness.
A beautiful thing.
Wow, it's really been a year since we met, Ben, at that faithful Shake Shack in Paramus, New Jersey.
The one and only.
We can't say that's where Baseline Jumper was formed because we'd been doing the show for like 11 months before then. But Pete, awesome memory, man. Welcome back to the show. I think you're officially coined our resident Trailblazers expert. How do you feel about that?
I feel pretty good about that, to be honest. It's pretty much the only thing that I've had to live for, for all 29 years until I got married 2 weeks ago. So I'm really glad that, frankly, I've got both those things in my life now.
Well, we're very happy for you, Pete. And if you could do anything for us after you hang up here tonight, is just get the Pacific Northwest on the Baseline Jumper bandwagon. You are our Northwest correspondent. You cover that corner of this great country, and I need you to spread the word. Tell your new wife, I wish you guys the best. Tell her to get her friend's cousin to listen. Let's spread the word about this podcast.
Let's do it up.
Yeah, you're going to be our Jeff Johnson. You're going to really expand our reach. For those of you who don't know, that is the number one salesman of Nike, first employee. Anyways, I digress. We're here to talk about the Blazers. And Pete, they're coming off of Western Conference Finals, had a big year, managed to make it up against the Warriors. Obviously didn't end up maybe how you were hoping, but have had a pretty eventful offseason. They get Nasir Little in the draft. They acquire a few guys in free agency. They get Hassan Whiteside. They get Kent Bazemore via trade. Lot of buzz around Anthony Simons. Some guys who moved on. Where do you want to start, Pete? I mean, what did you think of the offseason, and just kind of give us your thoughts overall on where you think the Blazers are?
For sure. So you're definitely right in that there was a lot of change in the offseason, probably a little bit more so than Blazer fans are used to, especially considering, you look at a couple of staples that have been around for a number of years with Al-Farouq Amino and Mo Harkless and Myers Leonard, people who've been part of the organization for more than, probably 4 or 5 years at this point. Heading to newer pastures, newer guys coming in, Whiteside, Kent Bazemore, as you mentioned, the draft with Nasir Little. So there's definitely going to be a new look and feel to the Blazers, but we have the same kind of consistency that we've had with our core leadership in Dame and CJ, which has me encouraged in the direction that we're going, especially coming off of last year's momentum. And as you mentioned, I know that the series with the Warriors didn't go quite as planned, but in my mind, we were really playing with house money there, knowing that we got to the Western Conference Finals for the first time since the year 2000. And, we were leading in games 2, 3, and 4 by more than, 15 points at any point in the second half. And we were just blitzkrieged by the Warriors. So I think all things considered, with the way that the season ended last year, the moves they made over the summer were definitely some big changes. But I think that we're going to see the same level of consistency that we've come to see from the Blazers year in and year out for the last half decade or so.
Now, yeah, Pete, I've been saying, no, Ben, it's my turn. It's give and take. This is how we interview guests. Do we need to go back to podcast school, Mr. McDonald? I'll take the rest of the night off. I'll go
Go
watch the Wild
go
Card game,
ahead,
all
my
right?
friend. Please be my guest.
Wow. You get one friend on the line, and you act like I'm some Frankie first year that you haven't been doing a podcast with for the last 2 years. Can I ask my question now?
Go ahead.
All right? Criminy. Criminy is a line that Helga Pataki used to say on Hey Arnold. Millennials. Anyway, so Pete, and not Ben, I'm not talking to you. I've been a big fan of what Portland's done this offseason. I love the Little signing. I think I'm not the Nasir Little drafting, I should say. I think Whiteside's a bit of a reclamation project because coming over from Miami where he got that huge deal and then did not play up to it. But I think he'll be great in the middle while Nurkic is recovering from his devastating injury. But you spoke about continuity answering your last question, and I think the Blazers really demonstrated that by locking up both Dame and CJ to huge mega deals. I mean, what are your thoughts on the deals, the money, and at least knowing that core, that all-star backcourt or borderline if we're talking about McCollum, but having them in Portland for years to come and being the foundation of that team?
Yeah, I am obviously very excited about it. I think that what we've seen Dame and CJ do is give the Blazers their best identity as a team and who we are as an organization in decades. You look at what happened in the early 2000s with the Scottie Pippen, Rasheed Wallace, Arvydas Sabonis, et cetera era, and how that ultimately flamed out. It kind of felt like a collection of talented guys that maybe didn't necessarily all want to be there together. We don't need to rehash the Jail Blazer years. Obviously, there were the what could potentially have been promising years of B-Roy, Aldridge, and Odin, which obviously didn't quite live up to expectations. And then we had a few years in there in purgatory. And I think that what the Blazers did just from an organizational standpoint of locking those two down really goes to show how important they've been to the entire, fabric of this entire team. And so I, for one, was, excited to see that they're going to continue donning Blazers jerseys for the next 4 to 5 years. And my hope is that at the end of the day, both of those guys have their jerseys draft up in the rafters. And, if we can add a championship in on top of that, fantastic. Obviously, I would love that more than anything in the world. But the fact of the matter is they have given this organization, this city, a lot to be proud of and a lot of fantastic memories over the years. So to keep that going is certainly something that the people of Portland are incredibly excited to have.
Yeah, and speaking of continuity, don't forget that you guys have the next great Hall of Famer, the future GOAT, Anthony Simons, who this offseason has gotten more pub than I can remember any second-year player who couldn't average 5 points a game as a rookie ever getting. My personal favorite, before I get your thoughts here, Pete, during NBA Summer League, he was called, quote, a golden ticket by SB Nation. They channeled their inner Willy Wonka. That's personally my favorite. What about you? What's your favorite part of the Anthony Simons hype train so far?
My favorite is how it basically became a runaway locomotive down a tracks with no emergency brake over the course of a month-long period. We watched the end of the season where Simons, played that final regular season game where the Blazers were trying to lose, and he went out and dropped 37 points and 6 or 7 assists, played all 48 minutes, and all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, who's this kid? He can ball." And then there were starting to be some rumblings at the end of the season about how the Blazers were very high on him. They thought he was going to be, a good piece coming off the bench to help fill that role with Seth Curry leaving, someone who could come in and play, that additional stretch shooter, play some good defense. And then from there, it just rapidly escalated and eventually got to the point where the Ringer's article last week about 7, important players in the Western Conference basically pegged the Blazers' hopes on Anthony Simons' shoulders. So I'm excited for the kid. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's a reason why Neil O'Shea was very high on his talent. He has been a very good evaluator to talent in the draft and developing that, over the course of a couple of years through the organization. I do think that there are probably some crazy unrealistic expectations for what he's going to deliver in year 2. And in this particular case, if I'm wrong, all the better. But I do really think that it's one of those things where people are probably going to come back down a little bit to earth in the first 10 to 15 games as we realize that, he only played in a dozen or so games in his rookie year, and he still is only 19 at the end of the day.
I totally get it. Yeah, I mean, listen, the hype train for a lot of these players that are summer league stars, some actually work out, some completely go away. I mean, remember when Jeremy Lin was the talk of the NBA? Now look at him, couldn't even get a job 6-7 years later. So I totally get it, but we'll see what happens with Simon. I do think that the Blazers do have a deep bench when it comes to Rodney Hood and Bazemore and Hazonia and Tolliver. So who knows how much he'll even play. But speaking of losses, you had mentioned in your open that Al-Farouq Aminu is gone after many years in Portland. Ditto for Mo Harkless, and his Cantor is now in Boston. So the Blazers lost a lot of starters from that Western Conference Finals team. Obviously, you have Jusuf Nurkic, who had those compound fractures in his left leg in March against my Nets. I'm very sorry, Pete. I knew you weren't going to come on until we agreed to pay you because the injury was suffered against the Nets, so I totally get it. But kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the guys that Portland lost, and then your thoughts on the Nurkic injury situation and a timeline where you see him coming back onto the court at full strength, because I know they don't want to rush him back.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the first part of that, in terms of the guys that we lost, I think that losing a guy like Aminu definitely hurts the Blazers. We always could count on him night in and night out to be able to guard the other team's best offensive player pretty much whenever we needed to. And so it's really tough to replace something like that. I do think, however, what we started to see as the playoffs progressed is both Aminu and Harkless struggled immensely against the Nuggets as well as against the Warriors. And we saw a lot more of Rodney Hood. And for very surprising reasons, he ended up coming back to Portland at a very discounted deal, which then gave us that flexibility to allow Aminu to walk and us to pursue other options where we had other needs. So I think that losing out guys like that have been very much part of the organization for many years and do a lot of those smaller day-to-day, less glamorous roles is certainly difficult. But I do think that we have made upgrades in the right positions, and we've given more options for shooters for Dame and CJ to take advantage of, because at the end of the day, that was what was really killing us in that Warrior series, was we just simply didn't have people outside of them that could put the ball in the basket. So I think that certainly, like I said at the beginning, it's definitely going to change a little bit as what we see, in the first 20, 25 games of the Blazers, of how we've known them for the last few years, but I'm definitely excited about those upgrades. With regards to Nurkic, from everything that, we've been hearing, it sounds like the Blazers are aiming for February, probably just post All-Star break, in terms of when he's supposed to return. So in the meantime, we're going to have Whiteside step in there. And, what's interesting about Whiteside is, if you remember, I think, Ben, you were the one who said he signed the big contract there with Miami 4 years ago. The Blazers actually were the other ones part of that deal looking to make the signing there. So this is not the, first kind of like run at him that we have taken. So there's definitely been a mutual interest on both sides. And my hope is that, given that this is a contract year and knowing how NBA players are notorious for that and how they play there, that we're going to see the best of Whiteside and be able to have him fill in those minutes until we can get Nurkic back and give him an opportunity to get himself into playing shape and ready for the playoffs at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, too, that we talked about before the show briefly was just, what about the possibility of these expiring deals to make a bigger deal for the Blazers? Because there's been chatter here and there about this team being in potential suitors for different guys. And it feels like this year they might really have the flexibility. They have some smaller deals along with some of those expiring ones. I mean, before we kind of get to our kind of predictions for where they could end up this year, I mean, do you feel like there's also moves to be made for Portland?
I do. I really do think that there are moves to be made for Portland in this case. And historically, Neil O'Shea, the Blazers general manager, has not been one to take shots at the trade deadline. His MO has really been about making small incremental upgrades here and there to just kind of